限りあれば薄墨衣朝けれど涙ぞ袖を縁となしける源氏物語葵もののけ
Murasaki Shikibu is an anti-demonic AoE arts caster with a mixture of damage capabilities and niche utility. She has 4 hits on each of her 3 card types, which consist of 2 arts cards, 2 quick cards, and 1 buster card. This means that she can get a lot of value out of a crit star generation buff. Her NP generation stat is not very impressive, but that is offset by her higher hit counts. She does decent damage against enemies that aren't demonic. However, when the enemy is demonic, she does levels of damage that may as well be single target. It is worth noting that the Murasaki in the previous clip is level 100, NP4, and has nearly maximum foes. Totally not a flex. The craft essence used was just a limit broken imaginary element, so the only buffs that factored into the damage were her own. So, what are the skills that enabled such numbers? Her first skill is an AoE 30% defense debuff tied to an AoE 30% special attack buff against demonic enemies, both lasting for 3 turns. Her second skill has an 80% chance of sealing a single enemy's NP for 1 turn. It also increases her NP gauge by 30% and increases her NP damage by 20% for 3 turns. In my opinion, her third skill is her best skill. She applies 3 buffs to her team for 3 turns. A 3-time damage cut for 1000 damage each, a 1-time debuff immunity buff, and a 1-time buff removal resistance buff. Each of these buffs last for 3 turns and they have a 5-turn cooldown. This means that the uptime is very high if you're using Atlas or Tamamo. Lastly, her Noble Phantasm is a 6-hit AoE arts NP that deals bonus damage to demonic enemies while also inflicting buff block for 1 turn. This NP nets a modest amount of refund, allowing for easier looping. So, what do you get when you combine all this utility? Well, you get a lot of things. First and foremost, you get a servant that does a ton of damage to demonic enemies. Lots of enemy mobs are demonic. If you just want to use her for farming, well, then good. She's very good at that. However, there are very few demonic servants. This means that in challenge quests, she will rarely get her niche. However, she has a lot of utility on the side. She can spam her buff block by virtue of having an AoE arts NP with a high hit count. Additionally, she can protect the team from pesky debuffs and buff clears. She has some rare utility that can be very useful. The only servants currently released that are capable of applying buff block are Jalter, Cleopatra, Fujino, and Mephistopheles. Cleopatra is the only one of these servants capable of applying it to more than 1 target at a time. She is significantly more reliant on card draws to get her NP a second time because she does not get refund from her NP. However, her NP gain is far better than Murasaki's. You would normally never do this, but for the sake of an example, let's pretend that you're using her against Ivan. Once again, this is only for demonstration. You will never realistically use her against Ivan. Ivan uses his emergency prerogative. Her third skill completely nullifies the AoE buff removal and attack debuff, and if she just used her NP, he does not apply his invincibility either. There are lots of similar gimmicks in the more challenging content ahead, so having a kit like this can make her very nice as a long-term investment. So, Murasaki seems really good based off of everything I just said, right? Well, we can conclude that she is very good. She shines in her own niches. But how does she measure up to the competition? In my opinion, she is behind most 5-star AoE casters. Let's look at why. First, let's look at their defensive options. Quick disclaimer, I will omit caster Nero from this list because she is a buster-centric servant, so her playstyle is very different from her competition. First off, we have Anastasia. She has an AoE attack debuff that lasts for 3 turns. This debuff combined with defense buffs that your team can offer can result in significant amounts of damage mitigation. She has a skill that reduces one enemy's debuff resistance by 100%, which can enable all sorts of debuff shenanigans. You can also buy the team another turn with a stun debuff that is nearly guaranteed if you landed the resistance debuff. Next up, we have one of the most stacked servants, regarding utility of course. Knightless Caster is capable of significantly increasing her own defense, giving the team guts, and greatly reducing a king's attack. She can also stall a turn by reducing a single enemy's charge or charming all enemy males. The latter has a lower chance of landing, but her Noble Phantasm reduces their debuff resistance significantly. Da Vinci is less of a team player. She has a defense buff and a guts on a 5-turn cooldown, and she can regenerate her own HP. Lastly, she can protect her team from annoying crits by reducing the enemy team's crit chance for 3 turns. Then we have Murasaki. Team damage cut, single target NP seal, and the AoE buff block. Aside from the damage cut, which can be very useful when it comes to mitigating small amounts of damage, she doesn't really have anything to deal with incoming NP damage. Her buff block can lock down enemy offensive buffs, but that doesn't directly decrease incoming damage. That just prevents it from increasing. However, it can block very annoying buffs like Pierce and Vulnerability. Her defensive kit shines brightest in a team context because it fills a lot of the gaps that defensive supports do not. Next, we'll look at their offensive abilities. Anastasia has a large arts buff for 1 turn and a team attack buff for 3 turns. Her Noble Phantasm can decrease enemy defense, and on top of that she can ignore invulnerability. She does not have an NP upgrade, however. Her NP hits 4 times, netting a modest amount of refund. She has a passive 12% arts buff as well. Knightless's offensive kit is not nearly as impressive as her defensive kit. She has a decent arts buff for 1 turn, as well as an NP damage buff that activates on NP usage. Additionally, she has an NP upgrade. She also doubles her effective NP damage against kings at 100% overcharge. However, you won't be finding enough kings for that to be a massive advantage. She has a passive 11.5% arts buff. She has essentially the same gain stats as Anastasia, but since she has an extra hit on her NP, she gets more refund. Da Vinci's attack stat is a lot higher than the last one. She has a 30% NP damage buff for 1 turn. On top of that, she gets another NP damage buff whenever she NPs. She can also pierce invulnerability for 3 turns on a skill use, and her NP ignores defense by default. This means that she can easily bypass enemy defensive options. Her issue is that her NP hit count is a whopping 1 hit. She gets very little refund from her NP, but she has NP charge per turn and a very large battery, so she's still pretty spammy. Her NP is also upgraded. Lastly, we have Murasaki with a small NP damage buff for 3 turns and an AoE defense debuff. She does give the team bonus special attack damage against demonic enemies, and she deals at least 50% extra damage against demonic enemies with her Noble Phantasm. She does have the highest attack stat of this group. She has the 2nd highest 5-star caster attack stat, period. Her territory creation is only 7% arts up, which is the lowest of the group. Her NP gain stat is lower than her competition, but since she has higher hit counts, she does get more gain. You know the general idea of what they offer in gameplay? So what about their numbers? How do their Noble Phantasms compare in regards to damage? I've calculated each servant's NP damage with their own buffs alone. However, since most of these servants have buffs that last only 1 turn, I ran a second set of calculations. The only buffs the extra calculations take into account are buffs that last more than 1 turn. Imagine that you used all your skills on the first wave. The second measurements account for the damage on all consecutive waves. The number will represent the amount of neutral damage to a single target at NP1. Anastasia has decent damage with her buffs active. She hits an average of just under 21,000. After that, her damage drops off hard. She drops almost 6,000 damage after her arts buff vanishes, leaving her at a whopping 14.4 thousand. Please note that this damage does not account for the defense debuff from her Noble Phantasm. That is applied after damage. You would assume that Knightless would be worse with her abysmal attack stat, but NP upgrades are very impactful. Her NP damage beats out Anastasia's average by 700, landing her at 21,600 damage. On the next turn, she deals an average of 17,000. I am not accounting for her King niche as it does not appear near as often as Demonic. Da Vinci is definitely the best in the group when it comes to general NP damage. Her turn 1 damage is over 25,000. On turn 2, she still hits over 20,000 on average. If you didn't already know, NP upgrades do a lot. Once again, this NP damage is offset by the small amount of NP refund she gets. Finally, we have Murasaki. This is going to be multi-layered because of her niche. Her turn 1 damage against enemies that are not demonic is kinda sad. She averages at just over 19,000 at neutral. On her next turn, her average lands just below 15,000. It's worth noting that this damage is slightly higher than Anastasia's under the same conditions. So this is where she shines very brightly. Her neutral damage at NP1 against a single demonic target averages at 36,000 on turn 1. This is because she is not only receiving a 50% damage bonus from her overcharge, she is also receiving a 30% special attack bonus from her first skill. Let me clarify the buffs that she is receiving. She is getting a 30% attack buff from her defense debuff. Her demonic special attack buff stacks additively with her NP damage buff, which totals to 50%. She gets a very minor card buff from her passive, which is only 7%. Finally, her overcharge multiplier at 100% is a 50% bonus. So we have 1.3 times 1.5 times 1.07 times 1.5. That totals to 3.13. For comparison, Da Vinci is only getting 1.6 times 1.1. That only totals to 1.76. Here's a chart for comparison. Note how Da Vinci is significantly higher in general damage. However, when Murasaki hits her niche, she does over 10,000 more damage on average. Note that the scaling for the Y value has changed in the second chart. This not only says that Murasaki does nicely in her niche, it also makes a convincing case regarding Anastasia's lack of an NP buff. She needs help, man. The last thing I want to cover are the supports that work best with her. The best supports for her are those that offer arts buffs and defensive buffs. She has several types of buffs that work multiplicatively, but she has virtually nothing in the line of card buffs. She also benefits largely from soft and hard survivability because she has nothing but a damage cut. So obviously these three work. Caster Artori works best because she offers tons of hard survivability, whereas Shikibu has none. Arts buffs and NP gain buffs are also very helpful because it makes her NP a lot more spammy, which is why Tam is also useful. Waver is good in pretty much any team because he is Waver. Murasaki works fairly well in stall teams, and Waver does as well. You might not have any of these servants yet, so I will list some more accessible alternatives for supporting her. Yes, I know that Caster Gilgamesh is a 4-star unit, so he isn't always that accessible. I have him here because he is very good with Murasaki. The best thing that he offers is his third skill. It helps her a lot with a much needed card buff. It also increases her debuff success rate, which is very nice for her since half of her kit revolves around debuff the enemy. He is also capable of taking advantage of her high hit counts and helping her produce crit stars. He also gets an NP buff later on that increases team crit damage on use, so he effectively can make her a crit-based servant despite having absolutely nothing in the line of crits beyond a second quick card. Mozart is a very obvious pick. He can help her loop with a much needed arts buff as well as guarantee a turn of crits. He is quite versatile in this. You can use his Star Bomb to help her get her NP, then buff her NP damage with his first skill. He can be used in all sorts of creative ways. You just need a little bit of imagination. Hans is another obvious pick. He can also make her a crit servant with his plethora of critical basic buffs, as well as covering some gaps with defensive buffs and health regeneration buffs. He works best with the second support like Mash or Tamamo. Paracelsus is very nice for her if you want her to spam her Noble Phantasm. If you want to 3-turn loop with her before Castratori is released, then you should definitely level him. His easily accessible NP can reduce the enemy's attack a little bit, which can increase the value you get out of her damage cut. Additionally, his guts buff can save her if she's in a bit of a pinch. I cannot stress this enough. Boudica isn't bad. Lots of tier lists will tell you that she is bad, but she really isn't. She gives the team several 3-turn buffs, including arts buffs, attack buffs, defense buffs, and in 5 months, a crit buff. She can't make stars for your team, but she can offer you a lot of value otherwise. Her inability to make stars shouldn't matter anyways. You have other supports that can do that. We don't have this guy yet, but he's pretty nice for her. Asclepius can now offer a lot of healing, guts, and NP gain support. If you want to use a budget team to 3-turn loop, he can help a lot. Lastly, you have David. David is able to offer hard survivability to the team as well as an attack buff. His art deck can be very useful for helping her get NP. Honestly, if you made a team with David, Hans, and Murasaki, you could probably do fairly well on a lot of content. I built a tier list of servants that are capable of supporting her well. It consists of servants that offer several buffs or debuffs that help her do her own job or someone else's job. This list is not 100% final. If this video does well and you guys would like such a thing, I'm willing to make a follow-up video that discusses this list in detail. I guess you might want an overall score for her. Personally, I would love to give her a 10, but after using for over a year, I am very aware why she isn't a 10. Her lack of raw defensibility can make her rely a lot on her team, when her peers offer a lot more defensibility. However, she offers a ton of unique utility. She can lock down an enemy's skill usage. This is better than Skill Seal because the enemy can waste actions when they're trying to buff. Skill Seal just ensures that the enemy will attack. She's capable of filling a lot of defensive gaps by keeping those team buffs from being removed and preventing those enemy buffs from applying. She's very useful if you make her work. I would give her an 8 out of 10. I love her gameplay, but she depends on her team a lot. I like her voice actress a lot, and I really like her characterization and design. I don't think I can make videos like these very often, but I have a few future servants in mind if I do. I occasionally upload some gameplay videos. It's usually budget or weird servant setups. I plan on releasing a video soon where I pit Tawara Toda, the Rice Man, against the twins in Olympus. If you're interested, subscribe. Thanks for watching.